Chapter 9. The Journey Begins. The kindly shopkeep smiled wide. "It's my pleasure. Everything you need is either in the closet or the laboratory." "Thank you so much, Dolma," Juno said as she closed the door to the small apartment room they had been shown, to 2 rooms, a bathroom, and a main room with a bed with gray woven sheets, 2 nightstands, a small brown couch with a fluffy pillow on it, and circular table with a tiny hollow projector in the center. Galen completed his usual sweep of the new environment before they both began to strip off their day's sweaty clothing and change into the robes their host had left in the bathroom. Juno washed up first as Galen fidgeted with his sabers. He replayed the entire day in his mind, taking note of what the townsfolk had said about Kestis versus what he encountered from the man. He had fought fairly well, with much power behind his strikes. However, unlike Kota or the other full Jedi Masters he fought before, Kestis allowed the dark side to cloud his mind, and therefore rashly and unpredictably alter his fighting style, strength levels, and scrappiness. But the fight had been easily won. Perhaps that was something he could thank Vader, as well as his past lives, for. "The shower is clear," Juno interrupted his thoughts as she emerged from the bathroom with her hair tied up in a towel. "I'll be quick," he said, shutting the door behind him. Steam still clung to the mirror, and he didn't bother wiping it. He knew he had no new injuries to tend to, and he already knew that his normally clean-shaven face had stubble growing, and it had been several weeks since he touched his normally buzz-cut hair. He'd have to get his clippers from the rogue shadow when Juno brought it closer later in the day. They had crossed the planet's stroke of midnight a while back. He quickly showered off, and sure enough, they were lying in the bed shortly, exhausted after the day of travel and anxiety. "How did things go with Merrin?" Galen threw the covers over his legs as he climbed into the bed. "She was able to make a staff appear out of green smoke in her hands. Is that something you can do?" Galen shook his head. "Are you going to be safe with her tomorrow?" "Yes, I will be." Juno cut off his last sentence, registering her lover's fear of losing her creeping back up. "She never threatened me, and I have my own weapons. I will be fine. But what about you? What about me? What do you think you are going to do tomorrow?" she asked him, nestling deeper under the covers. Galen continued to sit up and thread one of his trembling hands aimlessly through Juno's hair. "He'll probably test me. I'm not entirely sure if he will do so by physical prowess to measure my power levels or by force abilities. Maybe he'll throw me into a life-or-death situation to really gauge my strength, or see if I will turn on him." He felt her shift her head under his hand, and he looked down. "It's what I know. I do not know if he will act any different." "Different from who, Vader?" Galen chewed on the inside of his cheek. "He used the dark side. He isn't like Kota." "He's more like you?" "Not, As long as he or Merrin doesn't hurt or threaten you, I can handle anything." Galen finally began to fully submit to the covers, now face to face with Juno. She let out a small breath and turned over, pushing herself as the small spoon against him. He draped his arm over her waist and rested his chin on her shoulder. "You two didn't set a time," she mumbled. "No, we didn't. If he really wants me, he knows where we are." Cal knew that he needed sleep, yet his body would not take itself out of fight or flight, and his mind would not stop creating scenarios of the worst things that could happen, paired with what did happen. He had been beaten. He had not been strong enough to kill this Inquisitor. He acted first, but he was still weak. "I'll use him," he muttered to himself as he forced himself to shower. The water felt nice, but on top of everything else he was already dreading. He did not want to feel the cold of the basement after the warmth of the water. So he stayed, standing under the faucet, letting the water run from his long hair and beard until it began to turn cold. Only then did he let out a deep sigh and grab a towel. Standing in front of the mirror, the wound Dagan left on his chest could be seen even before he wiped the steam away. It had begun to scar, but the tissue kept getting split by seemingly daily encounters. His normally short beard goatee had been forgotten the past couple weeks and grew to have a mind of its own, curling and reaching ways and lengths he did not know how to tame. His windswept hair had stayed tangled and knotted even after the shower, and his eyes stared back at him, dead. All the other scars, scrapes, and bruises from running into animals, raiders, droids, and imps alike stood out against his freckled, pale skin. As his mind traveled down darker and darker paths, He gripped the edges of the sink basin as if it were his only lifeline. Why did that blasted hook have to break? Why couldn't Prof had just held on? I could still be on Breaka. None of this would have ever happened. He hung his head. Eventually his body began to take care of itself as he combed his hair and shaved off his beard. He threw on a clean set of robes. He jumped upon being confronted by Merrin standing just outside the bathroom. She reached up and scratched his now hairless cheek, returning his silence as he moved out of the way. It had become habit, sitting at the meditation point in the saloon's basement. He didn't know what to focus on. He just sat down. But he entered, and the setting had turned darker than he remembered it. For the first time since he opened himself back up to the Force on Bogano, he felt scared. Yet as he stayed, the fear turned into a lust for power as he felt strength in the creeping darkness. He breathed in a sigh of relief. He thought he had lost his strength, being so easily beaten by Marek. But as he stayed in the meditative trance, a slight longing for the stillness of peace and not the surge of power grew. In that moment, he set himself an ultimatum. If he taught Marek the way of the Jedi and Marek grew weaker, he would continue down the path he had been following towards the darkness that held power. But if he taught Marek the way of the Jedi and Marek grew stronger, then he would begin to deny the lust for power that nagged at the back of his head every time he used the Force. With a sigh, he exited the meditative trance and stood. He glanced at the workbench in the room's alcove, the compass still in pieces next to the prototype copies he had been working on. He rolled his eyes as he looked around the rest of the room. His mind picked up on the empty bottom bunk, and his heart raced for a moment before remembering that Kata was with Mosey. A separate fear dawned on him. How was he supposed to teach both of them? He couldn't let Marek around the little girl. He should not begin training tomorrow. Why did he choose the next day? He still had to get the rest of the library downloaded from Tana lore. He had to first be able to get the compass copied. He had to get fuel and tune up the mantis and... Cal. Merrin approached him, also in a set of loose robes which she stole from his closet. A tradition quickly formed as she normally traveled light and had yet to gather much of a wardrobe. She gently placed her hand on his arm and looked up at him, her eyes scanning his face. It will all be figured out. You aren't alone. What should we do with Kata? I don't want her anywhere near Marek. She can stay here with Grease, explore the town, or go out more with Mosey. There are options. Okay, good. He looked away from her, his eyes targeting the workbench once more. His brow furrowed. I don't want to say anything to them about Tanalore. I agree. Not yet. A pause. What? She demanded. Cal had glared at her momentarily before pulling away and sighing, squeezing his eyes shut and tensing his shoulders before releasing. No, nothing. You're right. Not yet. He paused, inclining his ear towards the door. We should sleep in the mantis tonight and let Grease have his bed. He's closing up the saloon. Yeah, let's go. Hey, wait. Cal reached out for Merrin. She stopped, but did not turn around. I'm sorry. For what? I can tell you're upset. For what? For... You don't know. She shook her head. She saw it clear as day, but even if she told him, he wouldn't believe her. He'd get defensive and angry or worse, hold it in and pretend everything was okay when it would eat him alive from the inside out, causing him to lean further into the dark. She began praying that the mysterious Inquisitor would be able to help straighten Cal back out, maybe knock some sense back into him. You'll figure it out sooner or later. Come on, there isn't much time until sunrise. I didn't say I'd meet him at sunrise, and actually I didn't set a time, did I? We know where he is anyway, but Juno and I need to hike to wherever their ship is. You'll be safe with her? Cal asked as they finally left the basement of the saloon and began to head toward the mantis. She doesn't feel like a threat. They walked in silence for a bit, walking up the ramp to the ship. How are you going to teach Galen? I'm not sure. He knew that whatever Yarrow had taught him as a young Padawan would be far beneath the Inquisitor's skill levels. Sarah had taught him some. That might be a good place to start, although he probably should gauge what the man already knew and work from there. They could go in the mountains, but they'd probably get ambushed by some troopers, and as much as he would like to see the man fight, he didn't want the Empire to know that there was another. He could be a secret weapon. That is, as long as he isn't still working for the Empire. As much as he didn't want to admit it, he believed that the man wasn't going to kill him. At least, not until he got what he wanted. Cal signed loudly as he threw himself onto the cot on the mantis, swiping a hand over his face. He wanted so many things, but most of all, he wanted his mind to be silent, so he shut his eyes and forced himself into sleep. The sun rose quickly and the town bustled awake. Many miners took their tools and headed out. Some began preparations for their return from their self-appointed shifts. Farmers and herders gathered their snacks and tools, putting on light layers and wide-brimmed hats. They all muttered about keeping an eye on the newcomer and his sabers. "Mosey, where have you been?" Gulu, a human male with a thick black beard and flappy-eared hat covering the rest of his head, asked as the hulk of a woman neared Pyloon's saloon, child in tow. "Been teaching Kata how to shoot. This is hers." Mosey patted the strings of the large sack on her back. "You missed all the fun last night. Want to join the bet?" "What happened?" "Oh, Cal attacked a newcomer, but he looks like trouble. We're betting he gets a bounty on him within 2 days. What's good price to add?" A sinking feeling enveloped Kata. The newcomer had to be the one with the pilot she recognized. She looked at the ground, thankful the man continued to only acknowledge Mosey. "You keep trying to get me to bet better luck next time. *name*. Gulu grinned. "I'll ask next time." "Hey, Kata!" Grease waddled out from behind the bar in Pyloon's saloon, strangely out of his hover chair. He embraced her in a 4-armed hug and stepped back. "Mosey treat you well?" Kata smiled and nodded. "We saw some interesting animals, and I learned how to shoot. She's not a bad shot. It'll take some time, but if she wants to learn, she'll be good." Mosey unslung the hefty bag from her shoulder. "We got this for you. If you take it to the back, Monk will help you," Grease said. Mosey nodded and picked the bag up again like it was a feather. "We'll have to do this again, Kata." "Yes, please." "Then we will." The woman smiled kindly and headed towards the back with Monk. "Let's get you a nice meal and some rest." Grease walked with Kata to the basement, then hurried back to the kitchen and whipped up some Skaz steaks. He quickly learned those were Kata's favorite dinner, and lunch, and breakfast. Once cleaned up, Kata re-emerged from the basement into the small back room usually reserved for grabbing orders from the kitchen, but the counter also served as a nice private table. They ate quietly for a bit, with Kata scarfing down the meal. She cleared her plate well before Grease and sat, twiddling her thumbs. "I want to learn to hunt. I want to learn to survive in the wild." Grease set down his utensils. "That takes a lot of hard work." "I know." Kata stared at him intensely. She would not back down, and Grease recognized this. He nodded and smiled slightly. "Who do you want to teach you? Only Mosey?" She bit her lip and glanced away for a fraction of a second. Grease didn't push. "Yes, I want her to teach me." The bearded alien nodded, still giving that slight smile. "If she'll let you shadow her, I think it would be good for you. Are you going to tell Cal?" Grease let the smile fade into seriousness. "I wouldn't let him stop you, Kata. There are more ways to defend oneself than with his spooky force. If there is one thing," the spark in her eyes diminished at his last interjection, "that you keep yourself open to learning from Cal in the future. I don't know much about the Force, but those that can use it can be very dangerous, and sometimes a blaster or slug thrower can't save you." He nodded reassuringly, while Kata gnawed on the inside of her cheek and twiddled her thumbs just a bit faster than before. "All right, I'll get this cleaned up. Since Mosey left, why don't you just wander about? I think I'll go into the ship. If you ever want to learn how to fix one of those, I'm your guy." Grease pointed 2 thumbs back at himself, while his 2 other hands held the plates. Kata nodded with a sheepish smile. Fixing a ship was not on her mind. "Maybe. Sounds good. Be safe, Kata. You have your comm, right?" She shook her head, and he fiddled around for a second, then tossed one to her. "Here, take this. It'll scan any frequency, but the one it's on is the one that I'll hear." "Thank you, Grease. Be safe." "Hey, Grease." Cal and Merrin entered the saloon through the basement. "Hey, you two just missed Kata. She's going to head to the Mantis." Finally, back in his hover chair, Grease floated over to the pair and motioned for Cal to get closer. "And you'll be happy? She wants to keep hanging around Mosey, so she'll stay away from the new guy." Cal felt equal parts relief and guilt he was supposed to be there for her, but at least this was something she chose for herself. Good, he ended up saying. "Thanks, Grease." "You betcha. So, tell me about the rebellion." Merrin fell one step behind Juno as the pair hiked through the mountains, back towards the rogue shadow. Surprisingly, she still wore Cal's so-called wanderer outfit, dark blue, loose pants, dark brown short-sleeve shirt over a three-quarter sleeve undershirt with gray hand wraps and a couple belts worn much tighter on her than on Cal. Juno had tossed her outfit from the previous day into the wash and wore it fresh black boots, brown cargo pants, a white V-neck t-shirt, brown bomber jacket, and a gray cowl. How familiar are you with the current Galactic Senate? Not very. There are over 1,000 chairs in the Senate, all under the Emperor. The Senate hearings that are on the holonet are useless. Nearly all important deals and choices happen behind the scenes in private committees and friend groups. Several of the senators that have been around since the fall of the Republic have kept in touch, but on a very low profile. She caught her breath as they reached an overlook they had been hiking for nearly an hour. Although Order 66 had been called and the clone troopers handled it with an astonishing 99% accuracy, it is assumed nearly 100 Jedi survived the initial purge. That number has dwindled drastically. I say all of this because the senators that remember the fall of the Republic still remember the Jedi and how they served the Senate previously. General Ram Kota stayed in touch with Senator Bail Organa of Alderaan, who had maintained influence in many spheres, and as I said earlier, nearly all important deals take place behind the scenes in friend groups. And Organa is connected with many of them? Exactly. Kota brought the initial military force and the hope that Bail needed to present the asterisk idea. Asterisk of a rebellion to the other senators that he already knew had grievances against the Emperor and the Empire. Merrin mulled over the conversation. How large is this rebellion? Juno pursed her lips. It is growing, she said tactfully. We have about a dozen planets entirely aligned with us and approximately half a dozen more that have begun to give troops and aid. 18 planets out of the entire galaxy? So far, yes. How are they able to help the Hidden Path? Well, how large is the organization? Do they need an entire relocation or just a section? A section. Survivors, mostly. There was a raid on the planet of Jade. Many of the anchorite people lost their lives, and the Empire overran the planet. Merrin decided against saying she had the contact codes for the rest of the organization just until she saw for herself proof of the rebellion, and hopefully, once they reached Juno's ship, she would have that confirmation. Do you have a recent count of how many Imperials are left on the planet? Not from the past 3 weeks, no. We'd need that, Juno said flatly. We still have ragtag teams, but now that there are senators and generals and a structure to this fight against the Empire, more caution is taken. Merrin nodded along. She understood. Didn't like it, but understood. Cal and Galen exited Dolma's workshop and crossed in front of Pyloon's saloon. Galen had prepared himself for an entire day of walking, if not walking, then at least riding Nekos somewhere. Instead, Cal stopped in front of the half-canvas-covered gold box to their right. The redhead pulled out a small device and pressed a button. The side of the golden box reacted, spiraling open. After you, Cal gestured. As soon as the other joined Galen, the box closed around them and the floor turned into an elevator. They rode down in silence. Once the floor stopped moving, the wall to their back opened up, revealing an open space of once beautiful but now ancient and decrepit training space. A large golden shaft extended across the high vaulted ceiling. Tri-colored rocks broke through the stone and gold flooring and walls. A black-purple walkway extended between the platform they stood on from the main circular platform. Cal stepped out first. He had wandered through these halls maybe twice since rescuing Z. He could make an escape back to the smugglers' tunnels into the saloon if needed, although parts would be more strenuous than if he had entered through the tunnels. If a fight broke out, he would be safe. He had hidden the devices that activated the walkways so random paths across the chasms couldn't be created. His intentions were to not fight, but to talk. He already knew that unless he could run, Galen would beat him. Again. The center of the room, although cluttered with debris, was the mark where Cal stopped and sat. Galen joined him, and the two faced each other. Tell me your story. Galen knew this would happen. He wasn't sure if it was dreams or premonitions he had while sleeping, but whatever they were convinced him to tell the truth. He could take the other man out quickly if what he told made him eager to kill again. I am a clone of Galen Marek, Darth Vader's Sith apprentice. He told Cal his own story, refusing to kill the image of Juno, running away, saving Kota, returning to Kamino, fighting and capturing Vader. Then the more recent trials of fighting the other clone Starkiller, his own death, Vader's escape, and how Bail Organa told Juno, Kota, and himself of Saw Gerrea's message. Throughout the telling, Cal really attempted to keep a blank face. It didn't always work, but he attempted. So, you are a clone? Cal asked. Yes. You fought Darth Vader. Twice. I have memories of more, but not in this body, no. Cal couldn't believe he was even asking these questions. He had worked with clones before, but none of them had the Force, and none had memories of prior clones, that he knew of, anyways. What happened to the original Marek? A bit touchy. He didn't actually know. He remembered fighting Vader. He remembered capturing all the lightning Palpatine threw at him. Then nothing, just opening his eyes and having memories flood his mind, along with light and droids trying to kill him. He died at the hands of Palpatine, saving the senators. The Emperor? Emperor Palpatine? Yes. Cal raised his eyebrows expectantly. Galen huffed. He didn't want to exactly tell this part of the story. He wasn't the one that lived it, and he has no way of proving it until Bail and the other senators vouch for him. Even if they all did, it still doesn't cover the fact that I had been instructed by Vader to bring together the Emperor's enemies under the pretense of creating an army to wipe out the Emperor. That was a ploy to get all his enemies in one place as to kill them. The original Marek sacrificed his life upon realizing what he did, and all of the senators and Kota made it out alive. And yet he continued to create clones of Marek? The Emperor didn't shut that down? Vader trusts clones of a man that betrayed him? The Sith, the dark side, expects and encourages betrayal. You want it. You need it to show your power, to keep your power. Galen stared off to the side, his hands almost talking for him. Marek was given a droid as a child. Its sole purpose in life was to kill him. It would teach him, me, how to fight, how to survive, give advice, get food. But it would also attack. Force me to fight when I was tired, when I was injured, when I was sleeping. Tried to poison the food it gave me. Tried to electrocute my water as I drank it. Yet, the purpose is to create the pain and the hatred that comes with it. It makes you stronger. You are forced to rely on the Force for strength, sustenance, guidance, everything. But it comes with the knowledge that your master does not want you and only wants your power. Even the dark side of the Force only wants you for your strength and what you can provide it. He looked down at his hands. It's exhausting. And now I know there are more ways to get strength. He knew he had to choose his words wisely. Then through the dark side. Cal absorbed the information. 3 thoughts captured his mind. Either the man was lying, the man was telling the truth, and he, Cal, truly should be dead. Therefore, the man really did want to learn about the light side of the Force. And what was his own reputation to bring such a man, whether he was lying or not, to him to learn, rather than from Master Kota, or literally anyone else in the galaxy? His original intentions overrode the questions, and hoped that it would help answer any, if not all of them. Hand me your lightsabers. Cautiously, Galen complied and handed the 2 saber hilts to the red head, who took the items and gripped them firmly, closing his eyes and bowing his head slightly. His face contorted and brows furrowed as memories and wisps of the past flooded in. So many lives taken with those blades. Even though the kyber crystals had been cleansed to some degree, the casing still held horrible impressions, so much anger and hatred, with confusion and desperation secondary. Everything he saw corroborated Merric's story, and the haunting chill of the faintest whisper of Vader's breathing as he reached the kyber cores pushed him out. The hairs on his arms and the back of his neck stood, and a shiver ran down his spine. He quickly handed the weapons back to Galen. Galen saw Cal's eyes dilate, and his hands shake for a split second. He understood to some degree that his life and journey wasn't normal, but just how far out of reach it was, he didn't understand. He was ready to ignite his lightsabers again in defense. What do you think I can teach you? Cal shook his head and wiped the sweat off his face with one swipe of his hand, forehead down. The reasons a Jedi fights? It sounded more like he was questioning himself. The mindset. How? He hesitated. I know there is a difference in energy between the dark and the light sides of the Force. How do you tap into the light? What is the mindset of using it? How is it different from the dark from your point of view? Chapter 10. Logistics. Against his wishes, Ram Kota settled into an office suite on Alderaan. The situation was new. He grumbled the entire conversation with Bail Organa, whose unnerving tendency to be competent both drove Kota up a wall and reassured him. Due to Vader's rescue and very few logistics officers capable enough in the rebellion's forces, it made sense to the blind Jedi that he stay on a planet to act as an anchor. Bail convinced him that staying on Alderaan offered a smaller chance of being blown up and leaving several planetary armies in chaos. Still, it didn't mean that it didn't irk him to the core every time he entered the office. The 3 white walls had been covered with sound-reducing foam panels. The window had been blacked out by black removable shades, and the floor had been covered by a sky-blue rug. Speakers had been installed in every corner of the room, along with ceiling-mounted holoprojectors, rather than a holotable. Even though Kota could move around objects with the help of the Force, in his spaces, if he could help it, he would change things so he didn't have to. He typically sat and meditated on the floor, however, the bottom half of each wall folded out into padded seats for guests. As he wandered into his office, Kota called for the sound to cut on and read him updates from each planet and its troops. With a heavy sigh, he settled onto the floor and crossed his legs. "There is a transmission for you," an automated voice rang out from the speakers. "Call sign? Moonlight." "Finally," Kota mumbled. "Patch him through." "Hello, Juno. Is the kid with you?" "No, General. Galen is still with Cal Kestis. Merrin, one of Kestis's crewmates, is with me. She is the one with information about the hidden path. From what she has told me, it is a network of informants kept by a Jedi Master named Cordova, with assistance from a Master Sera Yunda. Unfortunately, the Empire raided the Asterisk's secret place, and both Cordova and Junda were killed, along with many of the Anchorites, the native people of the desert planet Jade. Although the path is still intact across the galaxy, the Anchorites need help relocating and filling the gaps that the massacre left in their web. Kota listened. He wished he were in person. Then he could feel what the other woman was thinking. He couldn't even get a read of her physical attributes, and made a mental note to ask Bail for something after this conversation concluded. Besides that, the names of the Jedi Masters didn't quite ring a bell. He supposed that this woman knew more than she told Juno. "Merrin," he addressed the Night Sister. "How did you discover this network?" The Night Sister glanced at Juno, who gestured as she moved out of the way so she could take the mic. "I had been traveling after Cal rescued me from Datomir, and I ran into Sera Junda again. She was the one who told me about the path, and I joined. It allowed me to keep traveling, but now I had a directed purpose." "Datomir? Was she a Night Sister? What would a Jedi Master be doing with a Night Sister, and why would Cal need to rescue her from her home planet?" "This was Jedi Master Sera Junda?" "Yes." He racked his brains for anything involving that name, but couldn't. And he couldn't go and look her up in the archives either. He wanted to know how she died, who she was, why she never reached out. But that was personal, and so he flipped back to logistics. The people of Alderaan are always glad to give aid to others who are suffering, but how can the rebellion help you? The hidden path deals with information. When Cordova discovered the network, he began to use his expertise in foreign barren planets to facilitate hideouts for Jedi and simple refugees alike. Another large portion of the hidden path's purpose was to aid in the discovery of ancient texts, of Jedi and other civilizations and peoples. And intelligence? He cared about the Jedi texts and the Jedi known through the network, but he didn't need reminders on what was more important at the moment. The woman hesitated in answering, trying to choose her words wisely. "There are codes," she finally pushed the words out. "A network with covert names and ciphers for messages. Some that people like Saw Gerrera may know about." She took another moment. "The hidden path existed long before Cordova and Seer got their hands on it, and I do not intend to be the one to bring it to its knees because someone offered help only in return of all the information we possess. If it had been any other way, I wouldn't have trusted you." Kota grimly smiled. "I'm not finished yet. I have another question. If the hidden path is spread across the galaxy, Why are they not able to help in this case? Are they simply not willing, or are they smaller than you may suggest? You have the backing of politicians, giving you power, resources, a voice, and a shield. Others in this galaxy are not so lucky, General. Well said. He grunted and drew in a breath. Juno, will you accompany Merrin to the planet of Jade and send a report back to us? After that, we shall coordinate with Organa and whatever splinter factions we have that are able to send ships and supplies, whichever is needed more. Yes, sir. If I could have a moment alone with Captain Eclipse. He heard some unintelligible whispers, and soon Juno's voice rang loud and clear. Yes, sir. Full report. Yes, sir. She listed off their arrival, their view of the town and townsfolk, Cal and Galen's fight, and how they were currently training. What does Merrin look like? Pale gray skin and hair, markings on her face and hands. She is able to make objects appear out of green mist, too. So she is a Night Sister. I thought they were all extinct. She could be another asset. He stopped, mumbling to himself. Tell me, is Marek going to return to us? Will Kestis join us? Juno mulled it over. I do not know if Cal will join him. Kota hung his head and sighed. The kid needs to stay with us, and I want you back too, Captain. You know the Empire's tactics better than anyone else we have. Do you want me to return even without Galen? They had survived months without him. Do what you can to bring him, Kestis and Merrin, back with you. I want those codes for the hidden path, and we need more fighters. Yes, sir. A pause. Sir, I do not know much about Jedi training. Should I bring both of the men with us to Jade? It could mean exposure to the Empire, but it could also mean they get more knowledge and access from the hidden path. Yes, bring them with you. Yes, sir, she responded again. I need to speak to Merrin again. He heard the woman's name called out, and in a moment Juno confirmed her presence. Yes? The Night Sister asked. Captain Eclipse will coordinate with Kestis and Marek as to when the four of you would be able to leave for Jade. As a sign of good faith, I would appreciate the codes that Saw Gerrera already knows from the hidden path. Whatever happens after will be up to your discretion. This is agreeable, General Kota. I will be in contact. Aye, sir. Juno terminated the call. Kota listened for the high pitch of the speakers to end before standing, just in time, as he heard a knock on the door, which opened a second later. Good timing. Juno called. She has the woman who holds contact codes for an intelligence network called the Hidden Path. Captain Eclipse, Marek, Kestis, and Merrin will make the trek out there for a sweep of survivors and how much assistance is needed. As a sign of good faith, she will give several of the contact codes to Captain Eclipse, another intelligence branch. This would be very helpful indeed. Bale stroked his chin. Yes, Merrin stated that the planet Jade was a large operations and archives hub for the Path, and it had been decimated by an Imperial invasion. I'd like to see just how strong a force the Imperials brought. She had mentioned 2 Jedi Masters, Eno Cordova and Sera Junda. Do those names ring any bells? Bale paced around the room, his footfalls silent, the sound absorbed by the carpet and walls. Cordova, Junda. I believe I heard of Cordova in passing, but never met the man. Neither Junda. You don't know them. I knew of many Jedi Masters, but I did not associate with those that did not participate in the war front. Bale knew that the man had been a Padawan for years before the war kicked off, but he figured it was not the time to press on that matter. Perhaps they left some more information that's helpful to you as a Jedi outside the war. Perhaps. Kota fell silent. Are you worried about Marek? Kota grimaced. Something is changing the boy. That is something you want, correct? The general did not respond. What was it you were going to ask me? Bale decided to finally change the subject entirely. Oh, yes. Kota had called the man before the update from Juno. I need a table with tactile pieces for every planet and army, splinter factions, and Imperial forces. I can't sense what the holoprojector outputs. Yes, I will have that commissioned right away. And in the meantime, come, join me for a drink. Kota scuffed the bottom of his boot against the carpet. I don't do that anymore. Trying, anyways. Bale nodded, a small glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. I'll let Mara know about your request. And rather than a drink, how about you join my family for dinner? You do have good food. Bale chuckled. 6 it is then tonight? A young lady with bright red hair and a pale complexion dotted with freckles looked up from the holopad she held in her hands at her desk. "Yes, Senator? Mara, would you please pass this on to our engineering team?" He tapped a few buttons on his own holopad, and the note popped up onto hers. After a moment of looking the schematics and notes over, she looked up at him and nodded. "I will send this over right away. Thank you." He smiled brightly and left. "Thank the Force you're safe." Breha, the Queen of Alderaan and Leia's mother, took a long draw from her wine glass as her child finished telling of her altercation with some rebels in the Lothal system while delivering aid. Of course, this incident had been arranged to keep Palpatine's forces less suspicious of the Alderaanian government and people, but that didn't stop the very real dangers associated with her travels from existing. Bail Organa, Breha, Leia, and General Kota sat and conversed within the Organa's private quarters, a rarity for their dinner times. The small rectangular wooden table from Kashyyyk barely saw the family, but matters more private than the planet's state of affairs needed to discuss that evening. "But I did meet 2 Jedi, Kanan Jarrus and Ezra Bridger." She spoke directly to Kota. "Kanan was older, but Ezra was close to my age." The Jedi General mused. He hadn't heard of either of them, but to know that they already had contact. He said nothing else, although he picked up on a twinge of fear within Bail. Perhaps they could be assets? "These 2 are on a splinter faction we are working with, correct?" Bail's voice gave no indication of the fear that Kota felt within the man, even though the emotion did not diminish as the conversation went on. "Not politically." Leia rolled her eyes. "But their powers were amazing. General Kota, what would you be able to do with these Jedi?" "Yes, what could he do with them?" The old man mused, trying to visualize the pawns that he had. Would he want this unknown Jedi and his what child? Apprentice? To meet Galen? That was not all either. Many things. But it would not be good for too many of us to gather in one place. We are still hunted. Kestis is a wanted terrorist. Jarrus and Bridger have been marked as rebels and terrorists. But together you could strike down armies, liberate entire planets. That's not how this works. Why not? You have the power. Use it. Breha stepped in. "Leia, please. You know better this. This is not how we will win this war." The young princess crossed her arms. "Then what good is your power? Starkiller liberated Kashyyyk, and the planet is nearly enslaved again." Kota growled. "Then why are you still fighting if you've lost hope? How are you still fighting if you've lost hope? Fighting just to fight? Fighting to die quicker?" A pin could drop and the sound would be muffled by the heavy silence. Kota finally drew a breath. "It is our duty to protect. Hope isn't needed for that action. You do it to do it. Children don't need to understand that. So you are fighting just to fight. You've lost your hope. You do not need hope to accomplish anything. For warriors like yourself, yes. Perhaps it is entirely true that hope in of itself only helps," Breha interjected. "But for civilians, for planets, for the galaxy, hope is needed to spur change." The 3 Organas looked at the man before them. Although he clearly attempted to keep a straight face, all 3 politicians could see the minuscule worry lines peeking out from behind the cloth that hid his burned eyes. "And I think you know this," Breha finished. The dinner went on until they all finished their plates. Then Leia began to clear off the table. The adults stood, and Bail walked Kota to the door. "Thank you, my friend. And I'm sorry about Leia. She's still young and we've put a lot on her shoulders." Kota still felt Bail's unease. He needed just another interaction before mentioning what he assumed brought the man's unease. "Have a good night, Bail." With an absent-minded wave of his hand, Kota left the Organa's home. "You only got mad because you heard about other Jedi," Leia boldly stated, catching up to him. "Others survived too. But you're scared that if you all band together, the Empire will just try to take you out like Order 66 did. Or you might be another survivor, or the last survivor of your kind. Shouldn't a politician know when to shut up? When talking to other politicians, yes, and I do. But clearly you hate politics, so I don't have to worry about you saying anything against me in the Junior Senate." Kota began walking again, clasping his hands behind his back. "Why did you follow me? Because you need to include what other people see in your logistics. You cannot be closed off to hope or to hatred or to anything. You must account for all variables, and where they come from, and how to either strengthen or mitigate them. Now, why would you include hatred in that list? She fell silent as she tried to keep up with his long strides. He felt her emotions bubbling up, and she clenched her fist. Because it is important. It is powerful. The other side uses it, so we need to know about it. How to use it too? Perhaps he should scold her. He should say what Yoda told him, that hatred leads to suffering. But in the case of logistics, she was not wrong. In one aspect, he was glad that few people knew about Marek, and fewer knew that he especially knew of using hatred and what, for a Force-sensitive individual, that meant. How involved are you in the rebellion, Miss Organa? Princess. And, not very. I have other extracurriculars that I am involved in. The rebellion is just an extracurricular to you? Fighting and giving aid is one thing. But what is going to be here after the fighting is over? A government. I intend to lead, so I know that I must be able to see and understand as much as possible to be a good leader for those under me. I've got to hand it to your father. He raised you right up in his footsteps. He did, as did my mother. The title queen on this planet is hereditary. I will make her and everyone before her proud when I am queen. You wouldn't give this up for anything, would you? The politics, the power? The short brunette stared up at Kota, her eyes blazing. Even though he could not see her physical self, he felt her intent. I would not, even if you had the powers of a Jedi. Even more so. Well, princess. Kota reached the door to his room, practically hidden behind some office suites on a lower floor. If you would like, once I get my office set up, if you would like to see our battle plans, I would not kick you out of the room. The teenager beamed, then composed herself. I would appreciate that. That's all you wanted me to say, isn't it? You want to see all of this for yourself. Smart girl. Now get lost. He scanned his palm and the door to his suite opened. It closed behind him, but he already felt Leia's presence diminish as she practically pranced away. You tried so hard to politician the Force out of her, Bale. He shook his head and dryly laughed to himself. He kicked off his boots, tidied up, and threw himself onto his bed. His mind raced to compartmentalize everything from that evening, but eventually sleep took him.